What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and we are continuing coverage of the 10th edition faction reveal articles, this time with Chaos Knights. And these have kind of maintained their identity from the 9th edition codex. This is really being pushed as the Battleshock Matters Index. They are going to force a ton of Battleshock tests. They are going to manipulate those Battleshock tests and get massive bonuses against Battleshock enemies. So if you're looking to scare the life out of your opponent's bodies, this is the faction for you. And the biggest way that they interact with Battleshock tests are with their army rule Harbingers of Dread. This replaces the old Harbinger table that the faction used to have in 9th edition that was kind of a complicated ordering system where you would go down the line and get bonuses and force penalties onto your opponent depending on the tree within the table you were passing down. The problem was that it was, generally speaking, going to take the same trajectory basically every game, so it ended up basically just being like a combat doctrine where you would unlock additional bonuses as the game goes on. That is how this ability works as well. On Battle Round 1 onwards, your entire army gets the Despair Aura, giving -1 to Battleshock and Leadership tests within 12 inches of any of your Chaos Knights. From Battle Round 3 onwards, they gained the Doom and Darkness ability as well. This gives them +1 to wound against Battleshock targets, and they are -1 to be hit from Battleshock targets. Now, you're going to be forcing these Battleshock tests that then get manipulated and give you bonuses, largely from the Forged in Terror detachment rule. This is for the Traitorous Lance detachment, which will be the release detachment for Chaos Knights, and forces Battleshock checks in the Battleshock step of your opponent's command phase for every unit below its starting strength within 12 inches of a Chaos Knight. Interestingly, I don't know if this replaces the normal Battleshock. So if you're at half strength or below in the Battleshock step, you would potentially be taking a Battleshock test because of Forged in Terror, and then another one because of the regular Battleshock rules. Both of those, because you're within 12 inches of a Chaos Knight, would be at -1 leadership. I'm not 100% sure that's how that works, but if it does, you're stacking a ton of leadership checks on your opponent and potentially giving yourself those huge bonuses for attacks to and from those units. Now, which units are going to be benefiting from these rules? We do have the datasheet spoiled for the Knight Despoiler. Now, unlike a lot of datasheets in the past of this article series, we do see both sides of this datasheet, so we're going to be able to see the war gear selection. And the Knight Despoiler has very much been the build-a-bear knight of the Codex, where these guys are basically able to take any combination of war gear that is available in their boxed set. And it's nice to see that that continues on through this edition. They start with a Reaper Chainsword and a Warp Strike Claw, and can replace either of those with a Thermal Cannon, Gatling Cannon, or Battle Cannon. They can also take a Havoc Missile Pod, Ruin Spear Rocket Pod, and Hellstorm Auto Cannons on their top profile at the top of the carapace. Now, taking a look at their profile itself, we can take a quick peek at what these weapons do. The Knight Despoiler comes in at what we are now expecting to be the standard Knight profile, move 10 inches, toughness 12, with a 3+ save, 22 wounds, a 6+ leadership, and an OC value of an impressive 10. Now, all these weapons on this datasheet are going to be buffed by the Seething Hatred ability, giving the Knight a floating hit roll each time it's selected to shoot or fight, so this is to hit or to wound, not both. They also give +1 leadership to War Dogs within 9 inches when they take Battleshock tests. And if the War Dog is the same profile as the Armiger we saw in the Imperial Knight spoiler, then those will be important to shore up the relatively low leadership value of 7. On top of that, it can be damaged at 7 wounds, reducing itself to OC 5 and getting -1 to hit. Now, the weapons that are going to be affected by that -1 to hit are pretty impressive. We see some huge changes to weapons like the Thermal Cannon, which is firing only a 24-inch range now, a lot lower than the 36 of the past. However, it's shooting 2d3 attacks at strength 12 AP for d6 damage with Melta 6. So once it gets within 12 inches, it's going to be doing d6 + 6 damage with that high strength and AP value. I wouldn't be surprised if Thermal Cannons become one of the preeminent anti-tank weapons in the Codex. Gatling Cannon is also an impressive profile, 18 shots now at strength 6 AP 2 damage, which is a 36-inch range. And the Despoiler Battle Cannon is the same profile that we saw from the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon from the Imperial Knights Codex. D6 + 3 shots at strength 10 AP 1 for 3 damage. However, it has both the Blast and Rapid Fire D6 + 3, meaning that if it is within 36 inches of its target, which is basically going to be permanently, it's firing 6 plus 2d6. Now, one thing to remember about all these weapons is that it is possible to double up on them on this profile, because you can replace both weapons with the same ranged weapon. This could give the knight a potential 4d3, d6 plus 6 damage thermal cannon shots, or 12 plus 4d6 rapid fire battle cannon shots, making this knight probably one of the most dangerous gun platforms that we have seen in the edition so far. On its top carapace weapons, it can take the Havoc missile pod, an indirect fire strength 5 AP 01 damage weapon with d6 plus 1 shots, a little bit of a buff from the previous variety. The Ruin Spear rocket pod is a 3-shot strength 8 AP 2 d6 damage weapon, firing a bunch of crack missiles. And the Hailstorm autocannon is actually a super interesting profile. This is the Icarus autocannon, the anti-aircraft weapon, which is represented by its new characteristic Anti-Fly 2+, meaning that any flying unit being shot at by these autocannons is going to be wounded on a 2, re-rolling because it also has the twin-linked characteristic. It's only firing 3 shots at strength 7 AP 1 2 damage, but wounding on 2s rerolling against a lot of units in the game is going to be absolutely lethal for them. In melee, this is swinging either with the Reaper Chainsword, attacking 4 times at strength 14 AP 4 for 6 damage with its strike, or tripling those at strength 9 AP 3 2 damage with its sweep profile. If it retains the Warp Strike Claw, this time only 4 attacks, but strength 20 AP 3 for 8 damage. It can also sweep for doubling that number of attacks at strength 10 AP 2 3 damage. If you choose not to attack with those, or you replace them with ranged weapons, this can attack 4 times with its feet at strength 8 AP 1 2 damage. Now, while the Knight Despoiler only interacts briefly with the army abilities in the Codex, it does look like it is one of the most dangerous profiles that we've seen so far. I think that we're probably going to see an increase in the cost of these big heavy vehicles given their improved stats in the new edition, and I would kind of hope so because the amount of damage this thing is packing on its ranged weapons is potentially absolutely insane. Now, speaking of insanity, we also have the Knight Abominant, the Psyker Knight that is unique to Chaos Knights. While the Despoiler has its analogs in Imperial Knights, Abominants do not. And that allows them to interact a lot more favorably with the battle shock mechanics that the Codex is all about. The Knight Abominant comes in at the same base profile as the Despoiler, but trades its special abilities for Vortex Terrors and Warp Storms. Vortex Terrors forces a battle shock check on an enemy unit within 12 inches at the start of the shooting phase. And because you are within 12 inches, you are going to be -1 to that battle shock test because of the army ability. This being in the shooting phase is an important timing because it allows the Abominant to move up to get enemies in range and then potentially battle shock them to get +1 to wound against them. Unlike a lot of other codexes where forcing battle shock out of sequence basically only restricts stratagem usage on those targets, Knights will get a wound bonus against those models, so battle shocking your opponent's army as often as possible is incredibly relevant. At the end of the movement phase, it also has the Warp Storms ability. This is basically going to be the same timing as Vortex Terrors, since you're going to go from movement directly into shooting, but it pulses an aura of mortal wounds to every enemy unit within 9 inches of the Abominant. On a 3+, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. While distributed mortal wounds are the least valuable type of mortal wounds, this is still a pretty effective ability, just given the fact that it works so consistently on a 3+. In terms of the weapons, the Abominant is packing, it has less options than the Knight Despoiler, packing a Diabolus Heavy Stubber, a rapid fire 3, strength 5, AP 01 damage weapon, similar to the other heavy stubber profiles we've seen on other datasheets, and most excitingly, the Volkite Combustor. It looks like the Volkite weapons are being transitioned over to the new keyword system and getting the devastating wounds mechanic rather than mortal wounds in addition to normal damage. This thing is firing 9 shots at strength 12, unfortunately reducing itself to AP 0 from its previous incarnation, but again getting that devastating wounds at 3 damage a pop. So if it rolls any 6s to wound, it is going to be converting those directly into mortals and ignoring saves. In melee, it gets 3 extra attacks from its Bale Mace, so strength 8 AP 1 2 damage, on top of the Electro Scourge, a 9 attack weapon with sustained hits 1, giving it additional hits on critical hit rolls at strength 10 AP 2 3 damage. Honestly, not as exciting a melee profile as the Abominant had in 9th edition, because it had multiplicative attacks in the previous edition where you could make multiple swings with its Electro Scourge for every attack that you put into it. You were able, if you stacked enough attacks onto the Abominant, to swing an absolutely ludicrous number of times. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. It's fine in melee, I guess, but it's not really here to blow up enemy vehicles, mostly to clear out enemy heavy infantry. This is literally a perfect profile profile on that Electroscourge to kill Terminators. So that's most likely what this thing is going to be trying to do. Now, moving on, we do have a couple of weapons spoiled. Interestingly, they did spoil the Warp Strike Claw, which we already saw on the Despoiler datasheet, so we do not need to talk about that further. But the more interesting one is the Desecrator Laser Destructor on the Knight Desecrator. This is shooting 3 times, fortunately improving its ballistic skill, hitting on 2s, fortunately, at strength 18, AP 4, D6 plus 3 damage. It's a pretty solid anti-tank profile, but certainly not that exciting. It's gonna do a lot of damage to enemy heavy vehicles. Overall, mostly in line with the other anti-tank weapons we've seen from other factions. Last, but certainly, I don't know, it's fine, I guess. We see a stratagem. The stratagem buffs War Dog units and increases their damage output. It's used at the start of the shooting or fight phase, so not before units are selected to shoot or fight. That's an important timing to remember. And you select 2+ War Dog units from your army and 1 enemy unit that is an eligible target for each of those War Dogs. The War Dog lock in their attacks on that target, so they can only target their weapons onto those models, but you gain sustained hit 1. And if the target is battle shocked, you also get critical hits on 5+, meaning that those sustained hits will also trigger on a 5+, because sustained hits checks for critical hits. This is a lot of extra damage from a couple of War Dogs. The restriction of targeting 1 enemy unit is pretty impactful, and because it's the same timing as things like the Abominant force on a morale check, you can potentially try to battle shock somebody out of sequence and get the benefit of this stratagem. I could see a couple of War Dog Executioners potentially just lighten somebody up from half the table away if they have failed their battle shock check earlier in the turn, and then just being eviscerated by exploding 5 autocannons, which is pretty cool. So with that, that is going to be it for the Chaos Knights article. I think this is definitely seems like the way to do a Battle Shock Matters kind of army. It'll be interesting to see how this stacks up with Tyranids, because they're also being kind of angled at being the Battle Shock Matters faction. It does seem like their abilities are a little bit more consistent and a little bit stronger, but we'll just have to see the rest of the codexes. And not to mention the fact that these Knight profiles look absolutely ludicrously insane. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.